recalled the recent knife attack on a North Shore beach. Another person claimed to have seen this man urinating behind his little dwelling. Another person demanded that the local school be told because, quote, they have a right to know. The man who posted the Facebook post was accused of enabling the illegal structure on council property, as well as enabling the behaviour of this homeless man who sometimes was drunk and would knock on people's doors late at night. Someone named the name of the street and the number of the house. Someone else, whose profile mentioned that they studied at a Christian university, said that the Labour government needed to step up because if the public did more, the government would then get to do less, which was not a good thing. While another person reported that their young daughter could not sleep because she was scared of the, quote again, the strange man in the cardboard box outside number 20-something on something or other street. Then, of course, there were people who did offer to help, and they were willing to help him keep warm and clean, and gave him things to help him, stay warm and clean, and to make his little dwelling more comfortable. And there were people who offered sympathy for the situation. The next day, the man who made this post put another post up and said, authorities have come and they've talked with me. They called the same organisations that I have been calling, but hopefully they get more traction than I did. They said that if he does not move, they will get the clean-up truck to come and they will throw everything in the dump. A week later, one of the people who I'd noticed as one of the complainers, I think is the guy saying, oh, you're enabling this man from making his little shack, he posted this post with a celebratory tone, and it had these pictures on it. There we go. A big shout out to the team at Auckland Council for clearing up the rubbish and illegal dumping on so-and-so street. Our neighbours and neighbourhood are grateful. The homeless chap was offered an alternative accommodation by the respective authorities and organisations. And then he put a note underneath saying that the man had been located to collect what he wanted from the dwelling. And so the story ended with a happily ever after. The grassy burn was saved and the good people of this North Shore neighbourhood were able to go about their lives in safety, unbothered by unusual people living in unusual places. I wondered if many of the people in this story felt at a loss of what to do. This homeless man was said to have felt untrusting of the authorities and the organisations that were meant to give him a hand and help him. He was not keen on the system that they put him into. And he said that he felt safer in the suburbs than he did in the city. The man who posted the original post, and many others, clearly wanted to help but weren't sure what to do for this man beyond, giving him something to eat today, but they weren't sure what they could do to help him in the long term. I wondered, and still wonder, if many people were at a bit of a loss of what to do, other than just wait for the authorities to take him away and put him somewhere else. Other people clearly just cared less about the man and could happily justify it. They just wanted him gone and they didn't care where. Now, I don't dismiss the concerns that people had about this strange character who camped outside on their street, and I'll probably share a number of the concerns myself, but I did think it was interesting to watch the way that this little Facebook community responded to this event. Homelessness isn't a new phenomenon in Auckland, unfortunately, but it has gotten much worse in recent years. And normally it is in the CBDs rather than the suburbs, so most of us don't really see it. I thought it was really neat the way that a lot of people did put up their hand to help with offers to make this illegal structure, quote, quote, more comfortable for the man and to bring him things to eat or wear or to help him, clean up a bit. How does this relate to Amos 4 and 5? Okay, that's what I am talking about today. Amos 4 and 5 tells us about two things that God cares about. One of those things, which is the big focus, is that people are fair and that people care about those who are marginalised and who are powerless and who are in need. Amos 4 and 5 tells us that God cares about poverty and how those who are in poverty are treated. And the question or the challenge for us is that, the question, do we care about what God cares about? And if we do we show it? So I'm speaking about the bigger part of 2 chapters from the book of Amos today. Amos, to fill you in, is the name of a prophet, a spokesman from God who was called by God to speak. And it's his preaching and his messages that makes up the content of the book of Amos. Amos lived about 200 years after King David in the Bible, at the time when the kingdom of Israel had broken up into 2 kingdoms, okay, that had a bit of a civil war like those guys on the bus. I mean, it must have been a good argument for him to pull his sandal off, right? These guys had a really good argument too, and they ended up just splitting the kingdom in 2 parts. And you had the kingdom of Judah in the south, they kept the capital of Jerusalem, and you had the kingdom of Israel up the top, and they kept the name of Israel, and their capital was in a city called Samaria. So Amos was from the bottom kingdom, not far from the border. He went up to the top with a message from God to hit up God's people about what they were doing. So this was a time when life was quite stable and secure. Most of the time things were quite good. There was lots of wealth, according to the history books about this time, but the wealth was not, not everyone had a decent share of that wealth pie, as it were. Also, this was a time when there was lots of idolatry, there was corruption in the way that officials did their jobs and people did their businesses. There were plenty of people living in luxury, like, I'll get to that, while many more were left to struggle along or were even exploited. Amos was given the task of telling them that God was angry with these things, and he was angry with them, and to warn them that if they didn't stop, they would face disaster from God. So in essence, they didn't care about the things that God cared about. And so Amos came to remind them and to rebuke them, and to tell them that if they didn't start caring, they would be in big trouble. So, there's 2 things that God cares about, okay, not just one, there's actually 2. The first one is that God cares that his people are close to him. He wants all people, but especially his own people, to love and worship him. God is a jealous God. He hates it when his people love other gods or other things in the way that a husband or a wife would be rightfully angry when someone else or something else supplants them as the object of their spouse's affections. The book of Amos is known for all of its denouncing of social injustice and bad things that powerful people are doing to less powerful people. But right worshipping the right God and worshipping rightly, is also really important in the book of Amos. And that's what we see in a couple of our passages here today. So, for a start, Amos 4 verses 4 and 5 and chapter 5 verses 4 and 5. Let me read them out. Go ahead, go and offer sacrifices to the idols at Bethel. Keep on disobeying at Gilgal. Offer sacrifices each morning and bring your tithes every 3 days. Present your bread, the special offering bread that was made with yeast, as an offering of thanksgiving. Then give your extra volunteer offerings so that you can brag about it everywhere. This is the kind of thing you Israelites love to do. And in chapter 5, this is what the Lord says to the family of Israel. Come back to me and live. Don't worship at the pagan altars at Bethel. Don't go to the shrines at Gilgal or Beersheba. For the people of Gilgal will be dragged off to exile, and the people of Bethel will be reduced to nothing. Okay, so these were towns, Gilgal, Bethel, Beersheba. These were places, towns that had shrines for pagan worship in them. Some of these were places that should have been places of worshipping God, but they were tainted with idolatry. They were mixed, a bit of God's religion and a bit of other religion from the pagan peoples around them. This was a religion that was self-made religion rather than God-giving religion. Notice what they do in the first passage, in chapter 4. They come to sin, but they don't offer sin offerings. Religion was alive and well in ancient Israel, but it was not religion that pleased God. In the book of Isaiah, who lived in the kingdom down to the south and lived at a similar time, he said that that people down in the south, they honour me, they honour God with their lips, but their hearts are far from God. And here up in the northern kingdoms, these are people that went to the shrines where God was worshipped, but it was also mixed with pagan stuff, and also, as we'll see, they didn't care about God and honour the poor like God asked them to. Okay? They said the right things with their mouths, and to an extent they did the right things when they went to the shrines to do the worship that they did, but their hearts were far from God. Let that not be the case with us. We, today, we have to take care to worship and love God alone, and to let nothing else take the place that is rightfully His in our lives. We don't feel the same pressure from religious contenders. It's not like we're tempted to mix Christianity with Hinduism, or mix Christianity with Islam, or whatever. We don't feel the same kinds of pressures because we don't live in the same kind of culture. We're not the same kind of people. The pressures that we will face will be to take on other ideas and ideologies and practices and values that are very normal and affirmed and practiced in our culture, but that don't align with the gospel and the God who we worship and follow. We have to be careful that the things that occupy our time and our desires and our thoughts and our imaginations are not things that draw us away from God, and are not things that supplant the place that God should have in our time and our affections and our imaginations. Okay, this is the challenge that Amos brings to us today in terms of those verses. For another point on how God wants His people to be close to Him, look now at Amos chapter 4, verses 6 through to 11. In those verses we have a whole list of disasters that God has brought amongst His people. Now I would hesitate to ascribe God's hand in modern disasters, although I wouldn't rule it out either. But I wouldn't say, oh look, a disaster, that must be God doing something to punish people. There's two reasons. The first is we don't know. God hasn't said, hey, I'm going to smite you people if you don't repent. God hasn't said that. He did that for His old covenant people. He hasn't said that He is, every time doing that today. Could be, but I wouldn't say it with any certainty. The other reason is more of a theological reason. In the biblical history that we see and read in the Bible, God's people had been told, if you hear my voice and listen to what I say and love and obey me and do the things I ask you to do, you will be blessed in abundance. But conversely, this is one of the grimmest chapters in the Bible, if you refuse to hear my voice, if you refuse to listen to the things I do and you do all the awful things that I've told you not to do, then I will bring awful, awful, awful punishments upon you. Okay, this is what we read. This is in Leviticus chapter 26 and in Deuteronomy chapter 28. So, when Israel, later in their history, so that those chapters are from early on in Israel's history, so when the people of Israel see these kinds of things starting to happen to them, and the blessings that God had promised not happening to them, they should see that and remember the things that God had told them not to do. Okay? They should see that this is God reminding them and enforcing the covenant that He made and He set up with them way back at the start of their history. So we can't read these things for ourselves in the same way because we are not the Old Testament nation of Israel. Okay? There's a difference. There's continuity, but there's also a difference between the people of God in the Old Testament and the people of God in the New. But, here's my but. If something bad happens to you and it reminds you, maybe I'm not honouring God as well as I should, that's great that it reminded you. I'd strongly hesitate, but not rule it out. God's hand is in this, but if it reminds you to stay close to God, then that is a very good thing. I'm sure we can all agree on that. Anyway, they had faced a whole bunch of disasters in their recent history. They had suffered famine, they had suffered drought, they had had crop failures, they had had disease, they had had invasions, little raids from naughty neighbours. It's a funny line, I shouldn't. It's probably a bit too glib. Anyway, not like a full-scale invasion, more just like ram raids without cars, maybe camels, Yeah, sorry. It's probably the only thing you guys are going to remember today, right? I should just sit down now. Anyway, There's even some kind of judgment from heaven in verse 11. He sort of evokes what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? Not really filled in on us. But anyway, the tragedy and the point is in the refrain that we see at the ending of each paragraph where God says, "But you have still not returned to me." There is a sense that God's people have had all these things happen to them, but they kind of shrug and go, "Oh, well, good secular people, cause and effect, it must just be, El Nino or whatever." There is no sense that they have sensitive hearts and think, maybe God is saying something to us in this. Time and time and time again. Sluggish hearts, unresponsive people. They're too dull to really see what is going on. So let that not be the case with us. Be ready to return to God in your actions and your affections and in your thoughts when you are reminded, when you're reminded that you are drifting. Okay? Might not be that God is doing something to you, but if it serves to remind you of His goodness and His grace, and to remind you of your drifting and your slackness, or your complaining about other things in life that maybe, in a bigger perspective, we don't need to complain about too much. It is good to be reminded to stay close to God. That's what I want to take from that. Alright, the second thing God cares about. Okay, I said there's two things. This is number 2. Right worship must lead to right action. We can see that God cares about the way the poor are treated. He is not a God who is interested only in the rich and the powerful and the important. He cares about those who are poor and who are mistreated as well. And even though there's indications that there are droughts and there are famines and there are crop failures and there are minor invasions, Israel seems to be still quite well off. And often it does seem to be the case when disasters happen. The people who suffer the most are the people who are at the bottom, economically and socially speaking. The socially powerful, the economically rich, they usually get through disasters okay. A lot more easily than others. Okay, so there's lots of wealth, but there's a lot of people who have next to nothing or who are in danger of having nothing. And thinking about the way that we see ethics in the Bible, this is a pattern, the twofold nature of what God cares about. Right worship and right ethics, especially for those who are poor, those who are not powerful. We see it in the two halves of the Ten Commandments. It starts off with, commandments that refer to how we connect to God or how we respond to God. And there are also things that connect with how we treat other people. When we think about when Jesus was asked what was the greatest commandment, He didn't give one, He gave 2. Love the Lord your God with everything you have, and also love your neighbour as yourself. So we have to, carry 2. Sometimes, maybe not sometimes, it'd be nice if it was sometimes, but very often the danger is we grab one and forget the other. We think, we'll focus on right doctrine and being at church every Sunday and worshipping God and being faithful to Him. But we forget about, what has God asked us to do in the world that we live in? Or, on the other hand, people might focus on, we've got all this stuff here that we have to deal with, all these people that we have to help. But God kind of gets left out of the picture. Maybe the awkward edges in Christian doctrine get sort of shaved off because all that hinders us for helping people that we want to help. We've got to have the 2 together. Okay? We're all going to be prone to drop one before the other, but we have to remember we grab both and do stuff with both. Anyway, the first example, I know you guys loved it. Listen to me, you fat cows living in Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and who are always calling to your husbands, bring us some more wine. We all love that verse, don't we? We all chuckle. Now, I wondered, is this the first case of a gendered insult? I don't know. I'm sure there's lots of feminist studies that have looked at this verse and had plenty to say. I haven't looked. I'm sure it'll be amusing for someone like me to have a look. But anyway, it's probably not quite an insult in the way that we might think it is. Possibly the modern insult of calling someone, woman, a cow is maybe it's derived from this verse. I don't know. It'd be interesting to study that. Not especially useful, but if anyone, any Bible college students or lecturers have time to waste. Sorry, Jeremy. Anyway, leave poor Jeremy alone. That was to find out. So anyway, the cows of Bashan here seems to be something that's a good thing, except he's still indicting them. Bashan was a region in the northeast of Israel. I think it might be the Golan Heights today, maybe. Yes, thank you. The thing about that region is plenty of rainfall. Okay, plenty of rainfall means your grass grows really well, especially when it's nice and warm, which means that you have impressive and well-fed cattle. There we go. There's a photo I got. It's a good thing. Great cattle country, not the white cattle. Okay, lots of feed for the cows. Yep. And so the indictment here. I don't know if it's meant to be an insult, but the indictment here is that you ladies, don't know why the men are left off the hook in this present moment, but anyway, are like these well-fed, well-conditioned cattle that have everything they need. They are well off, they are comfortable, they're in great shape and great comfort. Even got husbands on hand who are willing to bring them drinks when they need new drinks. The problem is that they're well fed and well off, but they care only about themselves, and when there is so much need to be met and so much injustice and wrong things that need to be righted. And in fact, they even seem to be causing it. They are self-indulgent and they do not care for others. Here's a thought, possibly. Were their demands driving factors of injustice? Was it their greediness that was causing other people's poverty and unhappiness? People wonder today at certain times or certain ways that perhaps we don't do a lot of injustice directly, but the things that we choose to eat or buy or drive may cause problems for other people. Not on purpose, but perhaps there's some thought that needs to be given there at times as well. Another verse that speaks to this problem, the same problem of God caring about the poor. I mean, this is all expressed in angry terms. God shows us what he cares about by what he is angry about, because his people are not caring about the things that he has told them to care about, the things that reflect his character and who he is. Chapter 5, verses 10, 11, and 12. I'll add verse 7 as well. He accuses them of twisting justice. He says, "You make it a bitter pill for the oppressed. You treat the righteous like dirt." In verse 10, how you hate honest judges, how you despise people who tell the truth. You trample the poor, stealing their grain through taxes and unfair rent. Therefore, though you build beautiful stone houses, you will never live in them. Though you plant lush vineyards, you will never drink wine from them. For I know the vast number of your sins and the depth of your rebellions. You oppress good people by taking bribes. You deprive the poor of justice in the courts. And so those who are smart shut their mouths, for it is an evil time to be in. We have mentioned, I don't have it in I'm reading from the NLT today, but I usually read my ESV, and it mentions the gate. Okay, the gate of the city is the place where a lot of public events would happen. They'd have court cases at times, they'd have public meetings, and that was a place where people might be able to complain about things that were going on that shouldn't be going on. You had people who would bring up wrongdoings that should be righted, and it was there that they looked for justice to be made, for justice to be done. But verse 10 indicates that this wasn't going well. Bringing up God's law could get you in trouble. Speaking the truth in a law case could lose you your powerful friends. In verse 15 it says that God expects them to establish justice at the gate, and that is a justice that shows concern for others. Verse 11 isn't clear really about exactly what they are doing, but it is clear that it is the poorest of their community who are being hurt financially. Perhaps they were being made to pay a tax that they couldn't afford to pay, and still buying their food and paying, to still buy their food and pay their rent. I was reminded of the concept of what's called a poll tax. Do you know what a poll tax is? I do. No one. John does. Yeah. I I don't know what poll tax is because I've done a bit of history study. Back in pre-revolutionary France, the way taxes were done, they were nice and fair. They said, right, the king needs money to do the things that the king does for the state of France, and other places would have done this too. So to make it fair, everyone is going to pay 100 euros, or whatever they paid in the 1700s. Right, if we all pay the same amount, that's fair, right? That sound fair? No? So anyway, I wondered if maybe that was, I don't know much about taxation systems. You can ask John, he won't know about ancient Australian tax. Wealth tax. Anyway, we've come a long way from the poll tax. Someone had the idea that maybe we pay the same amount for every dollar you earn, and people thought that's fair. Now we pay it depending on how many dollars you earn, and some dollars are worth more than other dollars. We still haven't reached the utopia yet, so who knows what's next. Anyway, I don't know. I'm not an economist, so not an expert, don't know. Anyway, who were these poor? In that context, they might be the peasant farmers who only eat if their crops grow each season. They might be wage labourers who live on what they earn each day as it comes. Okay, it's like living paycheck to paycheck. They would be widows who can't really earn proper money, orphans who have no one to provide for them, or foreigners who have no support network of family around them. These people were easily made victims of greed, of people's desire for power, of people's manipulation of the legal system. They are the kind who might find that they need to sell their land, which they'd earn money from, or to sell themselves due to the debt that they cannot pay back. They are the people without power, without the ability to fend for themselves or cope with the knocks that can surprise people in life. They are the people who have no family or friends to hold them up during the times when they cannot stand on their own 2 feet. Who are these people today? We might think of the solo mums and solo dads, the young people in state care, those who have, through desperation or foolishness, taken on debts they cannot pay back. We might think of the working poor who work hard every week only to have their wages eaten away by the high prices of food, fuel and rent. We might think of those who live 3 families to a 3-bedroom house, or who live in someone else's garage. We might think of the incidents a few years back where it was found out that there were people, usually immigrant workers, who were signed up to work for places on 0-hour contracts. Yes, you work here, but we're not guaranteeing you any work week to week. So, you don't get 0-hour contracts for your rent. Oh yeah, I'll pay the rent if I get work this week. It doesn't work like that. What is injustice today in New Zealand? That was the case. That was sorted out, and I think we can be grateful that we're in a society that largely thinks, yeah, things have to be fair for people. People should be able to work, and get by comfortably each week. I remember a story once talking to someone who rented his house from somebody else, and he told me how his rent went up every year, even though the house belonged to the same person, and the interest rates went down every year. The justification, or the justice for this, apparently, was that the market rates went up. It wasn't the size of the mortgage going up because a new person had bought the house. It wasn't because the interest rates went up, because this was in the period when they were going right down over the past, 7-8 years until recently. But there was the market rates. Like I said, I'm not an economist, so maybe I'm one of those experts who shouldn't speak on things that I'm not an expert in. Neither am I a landlord, but something about that didn't feel right to me. This concept of market rates feels a little bit like it's some kind of deity that wants every spare dollar that can be squeezed out of the part of the Auckland community that rents squeezed out. I wonder if sometimes even Christians can be a little bit too quick to follow this deity of the market rates. Now, I will acknowledge, yes, it is a way more complicated picture than that. There's a lot more to the whole issue of renting and landlording and all that. But at the same time, I think that's an issue. There is an issue here. Some people will say that housing is a, quote, quote, a human right. I think it's a bit more complicated than that, because it's not really clear whose responsibility it is to provide that right, but we do know that shelter is something that is a fundamental human need. And I'd wonder if maybe there is an issue with housing becoming a financial investment in New Zealand and other places. I wonder if that's a big part of the problem. Again, I'm not saying that owning a rental is bad, but when everyone who's got lots of money to invest in things decides that housing is a safe as houses investment, I do wonder if the topic of justice could rightly be brought up. You've got to ask, is it fair to be able to buy more and more and more houses and to charge more and more and more rent? It might depend on who you ask. Those who are doing well off might point out that what they are doing is perfectly legal, and then still complain about the tax they pay on the profit when they sell those houses down the track. On the other hand, those who find that the size of the deposit that they need to buy a house grows faster than they can save because the rent price of the house they already live in keeps on going up. Let's not think about the size of the mortgage that they'll have to take out getting bigger at the same time. But they might not be so sure of the way that things work is fair. Whatever they think, they might feel powerless when older and wealthier people ride over the top of their bidding price at the auction for what they hope could be their own home where they can start a family. What does God care about? At least in Amos 4 and 5. He expects his people to worship him and to hear his voice and to care about those in their society who need a little help to get by. What he saw instead were people who were self-indulgent and self-interested, and their religion reflected that. Okay, remember what I said earlier. What we're asked to do in the Bible is connected vertically, us and God, but also horizontally, us and our neighbour, whoever our neighbour might be. One verse I thought was quite important to share was from Proverbs chapter 14, verse 31. It says this: "Whoever oppresses a poor man insults his maker." You might think, what the heck? It's me and this other dude. What's that got to do with God? God's not in this. But the second half says, "But he who is generous to the poor honours him." No wonder here, perhaps the idea that every single human being is made in the image of God is part of a factor in this. This poor person represents God. If we oppress him and mistreat him, or just neglect and ignore him when he needs our help, it's almost like we're doing that to God. Okay, it's a radical concept. The idea of the image of God in the ancient world was something only the kings and important people reflected the image of, the God of their nation. But the idea that every single person is made in the image of God, even the useless people, the poor people, the annoying people, they are made in the image of God too. And so the way we treat them reflects onto God. So do we insult God if we neglect the poor, or only if we oppress them? None of us here really oppress the poor, do we? Right? But I wonder if we need to think about the issue differently. Okay? If we look at, the fat cows of Bashan in Amos chapter 4, verse 1, and think, I don't do that. I get my own drink. I think we're looking at it the wrong way. I think instead of looking at the bad people and saying, yep, we're doing better than them, we need to look to God and say, are we reflecting God's character? Are we caring about what God cares about? As that song we sang earlier says, does our heart break for what breaks God's heart? Perhaps we need to think about comparing ourselves to God rather than comparing ourselves to the bad people. So, another verse, 2 Corinthians 8, verse 9. This is another really cool verse, I think. Paul writes to a church and he says, you guys know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, in that though he was rich, for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty you might become rich. Not financially rich, we're not prosperity Christian preachers here. It's talking about all the blessings and goodness of God that is given to us in Jesus Christ, that comes to us because of his death and resurrection. Okay? He was rich in the sense of, with God in glory. He became a servant, he humbled himself, washed people's feet like Keith was talking about earlier, and even humbled himself to the point of death on the cross. And all that so that you, his people, might be blessed beyond your imagination. Because of that, we should be prompted to care more than we might care about the things where other people are not as blessed in other things as we are. Okay, sometimes I think, we get really jaded and tired in the faith, and we need to be reminded and refreshed at the wonder and the awesomeness of what we have in Jesus that has been given to us. That's the sort of thing that should remind us and spur us on to care more than what we care and to do things with our hands and feet in a meaningful, practical, demonstrable way. So, what can we do with our hands and feet today here in West Auckland? I'd like to return to the story of the man in the cardboard shack on the grass berm in a respectable North Shore suburb. One of those ones that's near the water, okay, the Harrogate Golf side, the rich side of the North Shore. What would you do if someone set up a little home outside your front fence, thus bringing the problem of poverty out of the news and right in front of you into your neighbourhood, right outside your front gate? Sorry. I must confess that I would find it awkward too. I would be worried about, who is this person camped outside my front gate? But I would like to think that I could at least care in a way that I could see, that he could see, not me. I might not be able to solve his problems, but perhaps that is not what I've been asked to do. Okay, can't solve every problem that the world presents to you. And even in this, this is a strange and unusual case. This is, not the sort of thing that normally happens. Normally, homeless people don't camp outside people's houses in suburbia. I'm wondering, it must be more to the story. Why is he camped here rather than somewhere out of sight where he'll be left alone? I don't know. Anyway, like we saw some neighbour, called the authorities and got them to take away his little shack. But the question still is, do we at least care? And beyond that, in a situation like that, do we act on it? Do we try to do something that might help? It might backfire on you, but something bad might happen. That does happen sometimes when you try and do something good and it doesn't work out as well as you'd hope. But do we have the same heart that God has to put a foot forward and lend a hand in some way or another? The difficulty with poverty is that so often we just don't actually know what to do. We don't know what to do about it. Sometimes we'd rather not know about it. We'd rather blame someone else for it and leave the responsibility to someone else. We might think it's too big a problem and so we just avoid it. We might feel it's meaningless to throw our money at it when the government and big organisations have big piles of money that they can throw at problems that just absolutely dwarfs anything we can do. So you think, well, why? I could give $100 to help this, but I might hold my breath and wait a week and the government say, we're going to give $100,000 to that little problem. But we do need to remember here that we are disciples of Jesus. We're not ordinary, everyday citizens of Auckland and New Zealand. We're disciples of Jesus, and Jesus had plenty to say about caring for the poor, and often it was simply about reaching out and welcoming them. It's not always about throwing money at a problem. Discipleship looks to serve Jesus by working for the things that he cares about, finding a way to do it in the setting that we find ourselves in, and with what we have to offer, and with what God enables, whatever opportunities God gives to us. So, for a few ideas. We know in the past, I'm not sure if it's still running in the same way at the moment, but Chris Elwood set up and ran those workshops, and some of you here were involved in helping those. It was a good, positive involvement with local schools for the kids that had, more difficult backgrounds, and it was a really positive, helpful thing for them. In about a fortnight, we're going to hear from an organisation called Christians Against Poverty. They basically try and train people to be sort of like counsellors or mentors or something for debt management. If you have debt, to help you work out how to manage your debt, to get it paid off, and sort of stand on your own 2 feet. It's not the only thing that can help solve poverty, but a lot of people have found it to be a very, very, very helpful thing. I heard someone talk about it once at something I went to a year or so ago, and this young woman who had been through it herself said, "This was fantastic, it helped me, it gave me a sense of independence and my own personal agency rather than being helpless in the face of these debts that I have not managed to be able to pay off." And it looked like this is the kind of thing that churches like ours could probably do. People come to these courses, we mentor them and talk with them over a period of time. just keep your ears open when they come visit in 2 weeks. I can't be there on that weekend, but I'm quite disappointed about that. Anyway, as individuals, I think time for people is really something we can contribute, even though we're all very busy. Mental health is a big issue today. No one's likely to die by starvation in New Zealand, but dying by suicide is a very sad reality. I think these are often problems that money can't fix. Okay, you can buy more food and give it to people. You can, well, I was going to say you can build more houses, but you can't always just build more houses. But people power is something that has a lot more power to it that the government can't just magic up. Once upon a time, most social services were done by churches, but in the past 100 years, with the advent of democratic socialism, or whatever you call it, the welfare state, where the state has taken over more of that kind of job, the churches correspondingly have kind of found that their work in charity has been outsourced. But I think still the provision of community, the friendship that you can offer to people, I think that is a really important thing that helps people's mental health and helps them deal with the shocks that can come in life that they might not have the family and friends around them to support them for getting through for themselves. So people power, time for people, I think is really helpful here that we can do. You can talk to your, via politics, you can talk to your local MP about things that you think might be a good idea for the government to do. I remember some years ago, not too many years ago, it was discussed, should we start doing school lunches in low decile schools? And I know some people said, no way, we shouldn't do that. If a parent cannot put some peanut butter on 2 bits of bread and give it to their kid to take to school, they should be shot. People say that kind of thing. It's harsh, but people would say it. And I don't remember if it was debated in Parliament or anything like that, but I'm sure that you'd have some parties that, I'm not sure if we should do that, while others thought we should. I know, and Rachel know, of a family, just someone on our street, who a few years back, if the kids didn't have lunch, they just stayed home that day. If there wasn't food in the cupboard, they didn't go to school. And generally, kids that don't go to school long term don't end up, getting good jobs or getting employed or anything. Going to school helps set yourself up for life. And so, in this case, those kids would never have that excuse to not go to school. Okay, sure, there's going to be issues with waste and economics and stuff about paying for it and all that, but at the same time, I think it's the kind of thing there that if you are the kind of person who, don't write to the MPs you don't like and you're never going to vote for anyway, but if you're inclined to vote for a MP or a party that probably we don't think that's a good idea, because our voters won't like it, you think, well, you can write to them. Hi, my name is blah, blah, blah. I'm probably going to vote for you because this is, you're the kind of party I'd vote for, but look, this here, I think it is a good idea. Give it a good think, take it seriously, it can do some real good. Yeah, it's going to cost some dollars, but these people need the help. And I just want to tell you, I think it's a good idea, and I've seen it do some good somewhere else. It's something you can do. Other than that, think about what are your personal opportunities. What are the things that you do? What are the things, where do you work? What can you do as a hobby? What are the things where you can give some sort of small but meaningful chance for someone to have a help, to earn some extra dollars, learn a new skill, have some time to spend with other people that might be good for them to get them out of their house. Just think, what are the unique opportunities that you have that might be a real blessing to someone else, as a way to show that you can care about the things and the people that God particularly cares about. Anyway, Amos, let me finish off. Amos 4 and 5 challenges us to care about what God cares about. Right worship and care for the poor. I have focused on the second of those two today. Don't look at the bad examples. Don't go, oh look, those people don't care at all. I care in my heart, so I'm better than they are. Rather, look at God's character. You think, what does God care about? How can I care about it too? With my hands and feet, in a practical way. Remember Proverbs 14:31 and 2 Corinthians 8:9. They're both really cool and important verses. We respect the needs of people by remembering that they reflect and represent God, and we honour God by doing that. And the second, remember, the generosity of Jesus should prompt us to be generous to others. That's a very, very high motivation. So, consider how you might show care, how you might be ready to answer when someone else's need calls upon you. Like that North Shore guy who had the burnt hotel pop up on his front lawn. He did what he could, as much as he could, while that guy was there, until a neighbour called the authorities and said, "Get this guy off my street." But anyway, when someone else's need surprises you, be ready to do something. Might not be able to fix the problem, but you can at least show them you care and do something to it. At least. If you can do big things, it's good too. Anyway, let me pray, and then that will be us. All right. Father in heaven, thank you that you've blessed us with so much in your Son Jesus. Thank you for all the good things that you've given to us in life materially. The food that we eat, the house and home that we live in, the car we drive, the job we have to work, and the education we have, and the experiences that we have. Please help us be mindful of those who have missed out on some of those things, either through someone else's fault or maybe from their own mistakes, but help us be mindful of people who we can help. Help us to think of the people that we can show your care to as your people representing you in West Auckland. We thank you, as always, for the blessings you give us. Please shape our hearts and minds, our feelings to be grateful and eager and willing, even if not willing and eager, but at least ready to step forward and do what we might not be comfortable to do, but at least know that we can step forward, make a difference, and see what happens. Thank you, Lord Jesus. Amen.